Hello beautiful people, I hope you're having an amazing week. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Lily and this is where I share all of my DIYs. Today I will be showing you how I made these super cool faux agate cheese boards from resin. A few weeks ago I received some resin from the folks at Art Resin, and although I had my mind set on making some pretty cool wall art, which I'll probably be making soon anyway, these cheese boards won me over when I found out that this art resin is food safe once it's cured. That's awesome. Okay, here's the supplies you'll need. I'll go ahead and add a link down below for the full list of supplies and where to get them all. In this video, I'll be showing you how I made both the white and lavender cheese boards separately because they require different DIY methods. Okay, to make your own, make sure you have a flat surface to start off with, preferably a solid color so you can see what pattern you're creating. Then use a level to make sure your surface isn't tilted. Following that, trace the shape of your cheese board on an 8x10 piece of paper and lay it on your flat surface. Use some plastic wrap and add a layer over your drawing. This will help keep the resin from sticking to your paper. I've tried this with wax paper and it didn't work, just in case you're wondering. It was a total disaster. You can also give glass a try. I've heard resin doesn't stick to glass, although I'm not sure because I haven't actually tried it. Okay, once my plastic wrap was nice and tight, I used some regular silicone and outlined the shape on the paper. Then I used an ice cream stick and pulled up all the edges on the inside of my silicone mold. Let your silicone set for at least 30 to 40 minutes before moving on to the next step. Once your silicone has set, remove the paper from underneath the plastic and start mixing your resin. If you're new to resin, here's a quick overview. It's a two-part formula. You'll have your resin liquid and your hardener. You need to combine equal parts together, and depending on which resin you'll be using, you will have between 10 minutes to 45 minutes of working time before it starts setting too much to be workable. The art resin I used has about a 45-minute working time, which is amazing. To make sure I mixed equal parts, I used some plastic cups that I marked with a marker. Wear some gloves because it will get sticky and messy. Stir your resin for a solid 3 minutes, making sure you scrape the sides and the bottom really well. Okay, so something I actually learned while working with resin this time around is that if it's too cold, it'll have lots of little bubbles that you cannot remove even with a heat gun. I had no idea this could even happen. I had stored my resin in a cool room, and I guess that was enough to cool it off. So when I mixed my second batch, I actually warmed it in a water bath, which eliminated all the bubbles. Okay, to begin, I'll be showing you how I made my white cheese board first. The method behind this cheese board is to create depth in layers. I did a total of 3 layers. It's a lengthy process, but gives beautiful results. I mixed a small batch of resin for the first 2 layers, about 1 cup in total. That's half cup resin, half cup hardener. If you worked with resin before, you probably already know that you can use almost any acrylic paint to add color to resin. If too much paint is added, this will cause your resin to set really fast. I actually took advantage of this and added too much paint for the first layer to help create that depth in layers faster. So I took about a spoon of resin and mixed a 40 to 60% paint to resin ratio. Then I used my artist knife to help draw some lines along the bottom, lightly making sure I didn't cut through the plastic. If you rip your plastic, you will have ruined your project, and that's the tricky part. You might want to try this on glass. Following that, gently pour some clear resin over the area and use a stick to lightly blend the lines into the clear resin. Here's the heat gun I used. You'll need it to pop any bubbles that come up as well as melt the resin a bit. This helps the colors blend easily. Just keep in mind to move the heat gun around a lot so you don't melt the plastic. I mostly use my heat gun only to pop bubbles and move the colors around with a stick. My horizontal lines were set in about 10 minutes time. You'll know those lines have set when you can't mix them into the clear resin surrounding them. That's when you're ready to add your second layer. For the second layer, I mixed some white resin as well, but this time around, I actually did the correct paint to resin ratio, which is about 10% paint and 90% resin. This paint mixture definitely looked much more transparent. I made some diagonal lines with it and added a little bit of clear resin between the lines. Then I used my heat gun again to pop all the bubbles, making sure not to melt the plastic, and used a stick to lightly pull the lines into the resin without messing up the first layer underneath. Once you're done with your second layer, here's where your patience really gets tested. You will need to let this set for about 2 to 3 hours before adding your third layer. Okay, after a few hours, I mixed another small batch of resin, this time about half a cup in total. I made some more diluted white milky resin and applied diagonal lines, this time going in the opposite direction from the previous layer. Then I dripped more clear resin in between and used my heat gun to pop all the bubbles. To finish off this white cheese board, I added some super pale horizontal lines to the very tip top, and I let it cure for 24 hours before removing the plastic. And your silicone mold should just kind of slip right off, and that's it. Okay, to make my lavender agate cheese board, I lined the surface with some wax paper, which was a total mistake because the wax melted right into the resin and it was just plain paper then that wouldn't come off. I ended up sanding it off later, so I guess it's a fixable problem, it just causes more work. For this cheese board, I decided to avoid the 2 to 3 hour wait time between creating layers and made this cheese board in one go. Here's the colors I went with. To begin, I mixed another batch of resin, about 1 cup in total, and separated it into cups, leaving about half a cup of clear uncolored resin. To mix the colors, I added just a tiny speck of paint to the resin. These colors were very diluted. Then I applied the colors in sections onto the surface with clear resin in between. I used my heat gun to help melt the colors a bit and pop any bubbles. Then I took my artist knife and moved all the colors around, kind of blending them together. Following that, I added some white diluted lines and blended them a bit with the knife. Make sure they're going in one direction. For a pop of color, I decided to add some really diluted burnt umber and blended it in as well. Then I took the other half of my clear resin and poured it on top. I used a stick and pulled all the colors around to make sure they all kind of flowed in one direction again. And to add depth, I used some very diluted milky white resin again to add lines to the very top. I did this without moving the bottom colors too much. I just lightly grabbed the top of the clear resin and pulled out the white lines. Okay, I let it set for 24 hours and removed the wax paper. Then I trimmed the edges with some clippers. Don't wait too long to trim your edges as it gets too hard to trim once the resin sets completely. To finish off my edges, I actually wanted to add a gold effect. I decided to use gold embossing powder for this, or you could use like gold leaf or gold enamel paint. I just couldn't find out if this embossing stuff is food safe, so I would recommend touching it up with something that's food safe on top. To do this gold effect, you will need some embossing powder, clear embossing ink, and a heat gun. This embossing ink came with a stamp pad that I didn't need. I just used the clear ink, which is very similar to glue. Add a dab of clear ink onto a clean surface and use a detailed brush to apply the clear ink around the edges. It has a glue-like texture, but it stays tacky for a very long time. Then over a clean folded piece of paper, pour some embossing powder over the area you've applied the ink on. Use a fluffy brush to remove any excess powder and pour the leftover powder back into the container. Use the low setting on your heat gun to start off. This will help keep the powder from flying away too much before it starts to set. Once you see the powder is getting some sheen on it, you can turn the heat on high and keep heating the powder until you notice it melts completely. You can repeat these steps if the gold looks spotty. I found myself doing a total of 2 coats all around to get a solid gold finish. And that's it. I hope you guys are inspired by this DIY, and I hope you'll be making your own agate cheese boards or coasters. You can make them any color, add stones, beads, metallic paint. That's what I love about this project. It is so fun. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you did. If you aren't subscribed, don't forget to subscribe. I will see you all next time. Bye.